I'm Neil Steinberg. I'm here today in the newsroom of the Chicago Sun-Times with Maureen O'Donnell, my colleague of a long time.
Yes, and we have something in common.
We do have something in common. We're both obituary writers.
We're both members of the Society of Professional Obituary Writers. I happen to be the president,
Yes.
and Neil is an
member.
esteemed member.
I talked to the group last year, and I was so excited to be talking to people who were interested in writing obituaries that I immediately signed up. Plus, your graphics are really cool. Let's talk about obituary writing. You've become quite well known for it. What's the key? What do you bring to an obituary that you don't bring to a standard story about a gas main break?
Well, I think obituary writing connects the dots between the past and the present. We're writing about people who are little known heroes from down the block or from Niles East High School, people that you may have grown up alongside, the friendly grandfather or grandmother that you would see at the store, and it turns out they have incredible stories connected to history. They may have changed the course of history. There's a woman I wrote about named Viola Lennon, who was a mom in Franklin Park, I believe, in the 50s. And at the time, breastfeeding was looked upon as primitive, unsanitary, frowned upon often by the medical establishment. And she and a group of other moms from that Franklin Park living room started the La Leche League. Oh, wow. So now it has millions of followers around the globe. It advises many new moms. When Princess Grace of Monaco came to Chicago in 1971, she treated Viola Lennon and all the other La Leche League moms from the suburbs like rock stars. She said affairs of state in Monaco had to wait until she took care of her children and breastfeeding. So these women, you know, when they would go out and about and other moms saw them and recognized them, can I have a picture with you, Miss Lennon? So you're connecting people from the past and the present. Alva Roberts was the first lady of a church in Chicago that hosted the funeral for Emmett Till, the 14-year-old who was lynched in Mississippi. And his mother, Mamie Till, said, I want the world to see what was done to him. So there was an open casket, and 50,000 people came to Alva Roberts' church. She comforted the people who were collapsing when they saw Emmett Till. Her husband was at the train station when Emmett Till's body came back from Mississippi. So here's a woman who walked among us, but she's connected to that incredible moment that was a pivotal impetus for the civil rights movement.
Now, I assume these stories, when they came to you, they mentioned the Leche League, they mentioned Emmett Till. Do you sometimes have to kind of dig into a person's life? And here you're talking to people who are grieving, who've just lost a loved one.
Yeah.
How do you go about trying to ferret out the interesting parts?
In the case of Alva Roberts, I ferreted that out myself.
Oh,
but
wow. So they didn't say, hey, this is the big news.
Right. But as actually a reader let me know about the death of the La Leche League founder. But you know, there's gold out there if you listen to people, if you read death notices, if you take calls from interested readers, you hear fascinating stories. I found out from a death notice about Jim Cole, a Highland Park High School graduate who turned out to be the only known person in North America to have survived not one, but two separate attacks by grizzly bears.
Oh, wow.
Lost an eye in the process. Yeah. He was a wildlife photographer who got too close to the grizzlies on two separate occasions. He had to have his face rebuilt, survived, used to perform at Montana nightclubs as Grizzly Jim, where he sang songs about the grizzly bear. I called it an unrequited love affair. And
that's a fantastic
story. And Jim Cole passed away of natural causes in his own bed. And that was, you know, I just saw a line in a death notice that mentioned that he had this special relationship as a wildlife photographer. And if you Google him, at the time of his death, there was another Jim Cole who was a photographer. And if you went to the wrong Jim Cole's website, there was a line on there that said, I am not the Jim Cole who keeps getting attacked by grizzly bears.
Oh, that's very funny.
Yeah.
Well, you have to make sure all your facts are, I mean, you make sure your facts are right in every story, but in an obituary, there's that extra level of importance because it's sort of the final story that a person's going to get.
Yeah, because people carry them around in their wallets. They still cut them out and carry them around in their wallets in this digital age.
It's hard to do on a website.
Yeah. Or you know, they check it on their phone and they return to it and they reread it and they reread it. And I think it's sort of it's a comfort to a lot of people and an inspiration. I remember cutting out an obituary that I read years ago. This man died when he was very young, but he done marathons and, climbed mountains. And, I kept it in my purse for a long time, for those days when I didn't feel like maybe getting out of bed or feeling down, So they are inspirational.
I read a book by a pair of women who were inspired to write a book because of this obituary. It was one of the mushers to a famous run bringing anti-diphtheria serum to Nome, Alaska in 1925.
That's a great
The Cruelest
story.
Miles. It was a good book.
That's a great story. We had another man I wrote about recently, Erin Elster. He survived the Holocaust. He was a hidden child during the Holocaust, but more recently he became one of only, I think, 15 people to have participated in a hologram push. There are 15 Holocaust survivors who sat in LA, I think it was at the USC Shoah Foundation, state-of-the-art technology. They answered 2,000 questions while 50 cameras were trained on them, so that 100 years from now, school children and others will be able to talk to their holograms and find out about their story.
I loved your obit because I had met him and heard his presentation when I did a story about they were training rookie cops at the Holocaust Museum. And so he happened to be one of the guys there telling his story, and he was a very gripping speaker.
There's another guy I wrote about, Paul Krauss. Mr. Krauss was a liquor distributor, but there was a little line in his death notice that caught my attention. I started looking up information about him, talking to his family. It turned out he was an American GI born in Austria who had survived the war by leaving Austria to get educated. His entire family perished in the Holocaust, but he was fluent in Czech, English, German, and he is the man who apprehended Hitler's favorite soldier, Otto Skorzeny. He recognized him in a prisoner of war camp by his dueling scars.
Oh, wow.
And there's even a German word for them. It's something like Rekonmersches. I'm sure I'm butchering it. But he saw the dueling scars, recognized Skorzeny, and realized this is the man who helped Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator, escape from a mountaintop prison. This is the man who supposedly had Nazis dress in American uniforms to sow disinformation at the Battle of the Bulge. This is the man rumored to have been set to assassinate Dwight Eisenhower, our supreme commander in the war. And at the time, Paul Krauss only had a knife and fork on him. Skorzeny had a sidearm because this prisoner of war camp allowed German brass to carry weapons.
I didn't know that.
So he kind of, very nonchalantly said, will you step in this office with me? He got the gun away from him, got his own gun from a drawer and said, I believe you're Otto Skorzeny. I believe you're the man who Hitler sometimes said was his favorite soldier. And Skorzeny said, yes I am. On top of that, Paul Krauss served in the military with Audie Murphy, who's credited with 200 kills in World War II.
Very famous.
Very famous soldier, probably the most decorated soldier of World War II, who went on to a Western career in Western movies. And Paul Krauss was an alpine skier who was shushing down slopes into his 80s. But at the end of his life, he told his family he wanted to be cremated, but he said, don't bring anything of me back to Austria. They didn't want me. What a life.
What a great line.
What a life. Yeah.
You're obviously excited about all this.
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself when you have heroics and stories like that, it's easy. Do you ever find yourself at a dry well, and what do you do if it's not interesting enough to publish? Do you ever find where you have to tell the family, sorry, his life just wasn't worthwhile?
I think everyone has a story.
So if you dig
everyone
hard
has
enough,
a story, it's, and it doesn't have to be a World War II hero. A couple of years ago, I did a story about Mike Hawkins, and he was an instructor at the Harold Washington Library. He taught kids digital media. It was a creative place for poetry slams and breakdancing, and he was a mentor to somebody who we now know as Chance the Rapper.
Oh, interesting.
So everybody has a story. Everybody has something that they did that made history or influenced other people or inspires other people. Yeah. There was an obit I did a while back for the DeMuros, a couple that died just within hours of each other after being married for something like 67 years. And, you know, they'd survived the Great Depression in part by going around Chicago and making what they called meatballs out of eggs and these greens that they foraged from city lots. I mean, a little fact like that helps you understand how people survived the Depression.
Well, the obituaries can be a look into a historical era that people have forgotten about or didn't know about or past.
Yeah. There's another one I did, and then I'll stop talking. I'll let you ask questions. But a woman named Rose Scher, she heads up a company called Scher Electronics in Niles. Okay, doesn't sound that interesting, but Scher microphones are all over the world.
Sure.
Martin Luther King did the I Have a Dream speech with a Scher microphone. The U.S. postage stamp with Elvis Presley leaning into a mic, that's a Scher mic. Lou Reed pitched Scher mics. Roger Daltrey, when he swung the mic around his head, that's a Scher mic. Now, modern musicians, including Cage the Elephant, 21 Pilots, Maroon 5, they're all loyal to Scher mics.
Well, their
How
headquarters,
interesting is that?
I went through their headquarters just because it was such an interesting building.
Yeah.
And that microphone you're talking about, that model, what I thought was so neat
that
about
classic
it is
silver.
It's a piece of technology that's 75 years old.
Yeah.
I think they changed an aluminum diaphragm to silicon or something. But other than that, it's a great company. They just last week opened in downtown. It's off point, obviously. So that's the neat thing about Obituary is you start in point A and it sort of brings you to other points as well.
Yeah, and then this history is all around us. And it connects everyone. It connects us to the past. It connects us to survival. It connects us to creativity, inspiration.
Well, everyone wants to think their life is significant, and every life is significant in some way to your loved ones, the things you've done.
Yeah.
You know, you might not be famous, but you have a story to tell. And I agree with that.
Can I tell you about one more?
Please.
Margaret Vinci. She's a local woman, died a few years ago. She is the creator of the beehive hairdo. It's a hairdo that became famous with Brigitte Bardot and the Ronettes, and it's still popular today. It's a hardy perennial. Amy Winehouse, Adele, Beyonce, they've all sported the beehive hairdo, and it's all provable. She won a contest that was started, I think, by Modern Salon magazine, and there was an exhibit about her at the Chicago History Museum, and she's the woman who invented the beehive hairdo.
Do you ever find a life and you sort of hold on to it waiting for the person to die?
Well, we do, as you know. Both of us have done advance obituaries. You've done a lot more than I have, and I'd love to ask you a question about that.
Sure.
But I recently became aware that Della Reese was ailing, and she's somebody who, you know, currently people may know her as an angel from the show Touched by an Angel, or other TV shows that she appeared on, including Chico and the Man and some other modern TV shows. But back in the 50s, she was an incredible torch singer, a chanteuse. There were lines out the door in Chicago's nightclub heyday when she sang. Ramsey Lewis told me, as soon as she sang a few notes, you knew who it was, just like Dinah Washington or Sarah Vaughan. You knew that was Della. She was a stylist. And so I prepared her obituary knowing she was very ill. And it was an incredible story, glamorous, beautiful photos. She just, a wasp-waisted beauty, lit by this incandescent light. And so it was really interesting to me. Our readers really responded to that. They said, you know, I didn't know that she had this whole life before she was on television.
Some readers are uneasy with the idea of doing obituaries ahead of time. It seems ghoulish. But the truth is, especially with historic figures who've had these complex lives, if you're called to do it on deadline, you know, nowadays when things have to go up immediately. I remember I was at Rahm Emanuel's first inauguration, and Jane Byrne, the former mayor, came by, and she was very frail and bent over and walked like this, and I remember looking and thinking, I better get on her. And because I did it several years in advance.
Because you want to do it thoroughly, comprehensively, in sight.
She wrote a great autobiography called My Chicago, which, you know, on deadline you're not going to sit down and start to read it, but since there's no rush, I can read it. And then I interviewed other people and I thought about it, and because I had done all that, for example, I knew she was turning 80 years old. And so in my column, I could write a letter to her about her accomplishments and things I learned writing that. So it not only has the benefit, I mean, when she died, the Tribune put their obituary up in pieces, like it was a breaking news story.
Right.
While we had something that was complete and ready to go and thought out. And I was very proud of that, because all of us end at some point, and you want something. You know, I've done lots of work where the questions come up, and I'll call, someone who was famous and they did a certain thing, and then they went on and spent 20 years in this place. And usually in the obituary they'll say, and they went to this law firm for 20 years. Well, I can call the law firm up and talk about what the person did there, give it a little more richness. And
I'd love to hear the story about the obituary hunt that you worked on that turned up a connection to Sally Rand, the peacock of the Century of Progress World Fair, the fan dancer, and Frida Kahlo. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, the first one was the obituary of Abraham Lincoln Marovitz. It's kind of how I got into the obituary business. My brother came back from Japan with a woman he was going to marry. And so I needed a judge to marry my brother in my living room. And at the time, Art Patak, you remember, a mob reporter, and I said, Artie, I need a judge. He goes, I'll get you a judge. I'll get you the most famous judge in Chicago, Abraham Lincoln Marovitz. Well, Marovitz was a man who was born in 1905 and became a lawyer in a time where you didn't have to go to college. So he was very young, and he became this mover and shaker in the 20s. And when the Empire Room in the Palmer House opened in 1933, he took Sally Rand, the stripper, to the opening of the Empire Room. And here's a man who I met.
Yeah.
Okay. And so because he had been to my house, I started to research his life, and he had been a Marine at the age 37, and had this, could have run for governor. And so once I'd done all this research, then I wrote it up, thinking, and to show you the kind of collateral benefit, his secretary was a woman who he had an affair with for 65 years. Okay, going back to the 20s when she was a Catholic secretary, he was Jewish, he was an Abbey's Irish Rose thing. They couldn't marry. So when she died, I knew that there was this wonderful love story as well. And I'll never forget, he the privacy was important to him, and he didn't want me to tell it because he didn't want people to know.
But it's a story that connects us to history, changing
I said, Your Honor, I mean, I didn't want to disrespect him. I said, how about if I write it not as an obituary, but as a column? And then I won't use any names. And so if anyone doesn't know, they're not going to be told. And if they know, they already know. So I began the column, A Man and a Woman Fell in Love. And he carried that column in his wallet for the rest of his life. And the other one, Frida Kahlo, is actually almost even better. We had done an anniversary story for the 20th anniversary of the death of Richard J. Daley in 1996. And we had different photos with people talking and their ages. And I started to look at the older ones and think, well, we're going to need. So one of them was Leon Dupre. And I pulled the hard clips, the
Independent
files.
Chicago alderman.
Right, from the from Hyde Park, 5th Ward. And he had such wonderful quotes where he tried to defund the Chicago Public School in 1963, saying, you're raising children and damaging racial isolation.